We will begin. I have a few introductory remarks. I should introduce myself. My name is Mark Memagonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs here at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. And for the co-sponsor of tonight's talk, the Assyrian-American Association of Massachusetts and NAASR, I welcome you. Few announcements. Tomorrow, from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m., we will have an open house of NAASR's Mardigian Library down on the second floor of this building. All are welcome. You're not expected to stay for all 5 hours from 2 to 7 p.m., although that's an option. There will be tours of the library and 2 separate presentations at 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock by our library curator, Ani Babayan, who is here, and with an assist from myself, and we will showcase highlights from our collections and show you around the library for anyone who would like to come. We would be happy to see you. On Monday, October 16th, we will present a special forum panel discussion entitled Who is an Armenian American? Who indeed? With panelists Lisa Gulasarian from Harvard University, Julia Hintlian, PhD candidate at Harvard University, and Steve Kirkjian, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. We invite members of the community to join with us in the first of a series of programs exploring various aspects of Armenian American identities, which is supported by a grant from Mass Humanities. You're more than welcome to come. You don't actually have to be Armenian American to attend, but certainly your Armenian Americans are welcome as well, and so are Assyrian Americans and any other kind of Americans who wish to show up, or non-Americans. We have lots of other upcoming programs, whether in person, online, or hybrid. In the past 25 years, I literally can't remember a busier time at NAASR for events. This is therefore a good time for me to mention that NAASR as an organization depends on the support of our members and friends. So if you are not a member and would like to be a member, please become a member. And if you are already a member, thank you, and please continue to support our work. And I'm sure the same is true, by the way, of the Assyrian-American Association of Massachusetts, who undoubtedly also depends on membership support and the support of their friends, but we'll hear about that shortly, I think. Now, to tonight's presentation. I had the privilege of speaking in 2015 in North Grafton, Mass, at the dedication of the Assyrian Genocide monument there. It was a very moving experience for me. I'm the descendant of Armenians from Kharper, mainly, where the Armenians and Assyrians lived side by side, and often more than side by side, sometimes intermarrying, very side by side. In Kharper and elsewhere, Armenians and Assyrians largely shared the same fate in and after 1915, genocide and dispersal. In many cases, the old world closeness was replicated in the new world. For example, my grandmother, who was born in 1903 in Massachusetts to Kharpetsi Armenians, before she was married to my grandfather, had been married to an Assyrian from Kharper, who died at a very young age. 20 years ago, there was hardly any scholarship in English on the genocide of the Assyrians, and accounts of the Armenian genocide too often simply mentioned in passing, if at all, that Assyrians, too, died in large numbers. Today, fortunately, due to the work of many, the situation has changed, and awareness of the Assyrian genocide has come a very long way. We're very fortunate to have with us tonight Mr. Michael Hanna, who is the president of the Assyrian-American Association of Massachusetts, and I would like to ask him to come up and say a few words, and while he is walking this way, I would like to mention that we also have with us an old friend, Dr. Eden Nabi Fry, who helped make this program tonight possible by connecting us with our speaker, and I would like to say hello to Eden and wave to her. Michael.
Hello, everyone. First, First off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Michael Hanna. I'm the president of the Assyrian-American organization in Massachusetts. I'd like to say thank you to Mark, to Dr. Anahit, to everybody for being here today and for putting together this event. You know, as Mark sort of alluded to, we're a small but mighty organization, and we welcome and we really like to engage with other organizations such as this one, and I guess engage in dialogue and educational lectures, and we're more than happy to continue this relationship and continue to work together to deliver events like this. So thank you so much, and excited to be here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michael. Obviously, for the Armenian community here and around the world, this is a very trying and stressful time as our attention and our thoughts are elsewhere on what's happened recently in Artsakh, what is happening in Armenia right now with the 100,000 or more refugees. And there's no question that this has our thoughts diverted in other directions. And I was talking to our speaker beforehand, and you know, one has thoughts at such times about whether one continues with your work that's focused perhaps on in other areas, or do you set it aside and focus exclusively on what's happening in the here and now? We're trying to do both, frankly, because I think we believe that it's important to keep doing our work, that it has value, and we're also trying to keep our eyes on what's happening in Armenia and with Artsakh, and there have been and there will continue to be numerous events and programs focusing on that as well. So we do appreciate the opportunity to hear about a subject that unfortunately is still not as well known among Armenians as it ought to be. So we're very pleased to have with us Professor Anahit Khosroeva, who is a genocide scholar from Armenia, who is a leading researcher at the Department of Armenian Genocide Studies at the Institute of History in the Armenian National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Khosroeva is the author of a dozen research books and monographs, as well as numerous articles on the history of the Armenian, Assyrian, Greek genocide during the Ottoman period in various languages. Her research interests include comparative genocide studies and human rights, and she has presented at various worldwide academic and political conferences. And in fact, in 2015, through her efforts, a month before the commemoration of the centennial of the Armenian Genocide, the National Assembly of the Republic of Armenia unanimously passed a resolution recognizing the Greek and Assyrian genocide committed by the Ottoman Empire during 1915 to 23, concurrently with the Armenian genocide, an important step, an important recognition. So please welcome Dr. Anahit Khosroeva. We'll get the microphone at the right height, and
Thank you.
we'll lower it if necessary. Maybe it's necessary. Good.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for coming. I know it's Thursday evening and looks like everyone wants to go home and get rest, but thank you so much for being here. Mark, thank you so much for beautiful introduction, and thank you so much for organizing this event. And as we spoke, you said right, we don't know, is it the right time to do all other subjects besides Artsakh or no, but life continues, and all of us, we have to do our job to stay strong and to see what we are doing in future. And also I think Assyrians of Boston to be here, and also Dr. Eden Nabi to put us through connection, and I'm going to start, so don't take much of your time. In 2007, the International Association of Genocide Scholars reached a common understanding that the Ottoman campaign against Christian minorities of the Ottoman Empire between 1914 and 1923 constituted a genocide against the Armenians, Assyrians, and Pontian and Anatolian Greeks. The president of the Genocide Watch encouraged the denial by the world's leading genocide scholars of the Turkish government, but that time 92-year denial of the Ottoman genocides against the Christian population, including Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks. The dissolution of the Ottoman Empire is in both historiography and public memory almost solely associated with the murder of the Armenians. Although the Turkish government still denies that the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire fell victim to a systematic murder, the extermination of the Armenians is far from being a forgotten genocide. No book on the history of genocide can omit the case of the Armenians. It counts as the first modern genocide, which was presently understood by much of the world to have been the climax of a long history of oppression and violence for a group that had suffered for centuries as a Christian minority at the hands of the Turks. Unfortunately, achieving the global remembrance of the genocide against Armenians seems to have downplayed the fate of all other Christian minority groups in the Ottoman Empire, such as Assyrians, that suffered from ethnic cleansing and mass murder at the hands of the Sultan Abdul Hamid II and Young Turks. So, understand all this and come to the main subject of our presentation today. Let's see what is the Assyrian genocide, why we are entitled to call it genocide but not violence, slaughter, massacre, atrocities, or whatever. What was the cause of this genocide in the Ottoman Empire, and could it be possible to avoid it? What are the consequences of the more than a century-long not recognition and denial of the Assyrian genocide, certainly the Armenian and Greek genocides along with it, but today's Republic of Turkey, successor of the Ottoman Empire? The Assyrian genocide, along with Armenian and Greek genocides, was the first intent ethnic cleansing and mass extermination of the 20th century, which occurred in the Ottoman Empire during the World War I. Hundreds of thousands of Assyrians perished as a result of execution, deportation, starvation, diseases, the harsh environment, and physical abuse. The systematic manner in which the massacres and slaughters of Assyrians was conducted, along with the documented intentions of Turkish leaders and sheer number of individuals murdered, demonstrate that the Turkish government planned and to a great extent succeeded in fulfilling a policy of genocide toward the Assyrian people, with the criminal connivance of the world's major powers and taking the opportunity presented by the martial law. Turkey committed the gravest crime against humanity, genocide. The First World War was an ideal context in which the Ottoman state could accomplish this goal. The war not only observed the recourses and focused the world's major powers, but it also created a morally ambiguous atmosphere where brutality and death on a massive scale could be justified or trivialized. The Assyrians, whose Christian identity and cultural durability were perceived by Turkish nationalists to be undesirable obstacles to the realization of a pan-Turkic nation, found themselves barriers of a misfortune with reverberations lasting to this very day. The professional investigation of the anatomy of the Ottoman Empire by a lot of worldwide scholars let us deduce that the latter bore crime and genocide, and topologically could be categorized as a genocidal state. The Ottoman state system, with inclination to slaughters and genocide, had provided itself with an adequate concept, a theoretical foundation for the preparation and perpetration of our genocides. Henry Morgenthau, who served as U.S. ambassador in Constantinople until 1916, stated in his memories, The Armenians are not the only subject people in Turkey which have suffered from the policy of making Turkey exclusively the country of the Turks. The story which I have told about the Armenians, I could also tell with certain modifications about the Greeks and the Assyrians. Nevertheless, the suffering of the Assyrians is largely forgotten internationally and not recognized as genocide, which embitters the descendants of the victims. This ancient civilized nation faced the menace of total physical extermination in the name of bringing about the dream of the young Turks to create a pure Turkish state. The genocidal quality of the murderous campaign against not only the Armenians but also Assyrians is obvious. Historians who realize that the young Turks' extermination policies against Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks have to be analyzed together and understood as an entity are therefore often tend to speak of a Christian genocide. The destruction of these free Christian communities was one aspect of the homogenizing process when a modern state with its destructive power out of ideological radicalization identified part of its own civilians as undesirable. The Assyrian genocide occurred in the same circumstances as the Armenian genocide. It was part of the same process, taking place in the same locations, at the same time, and by the same perpetrator. At the turn of the 20th century, the Assyrian people in the Ottoman Empire amounted to be about 1 million with common language, culture, and national traditions. They were concentrated in the territory of modern Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Syria. Like other Christians living in the Ottoman Empire, Assyrians were treated as second-class citizens. Many Assyrians studied in Turkish educational institutions, but after getting their diplomas, found that no opportunities for employment in public positions of authority. They didn't have an opportunity to economically develop their regions. Turkish authorities restricted where the Assyrians lived so that they could not form a majority among the other nations with whom they lived. This was done in order to deprive them of the possibility of putting together a united front. An active public policy was conducted to arouse national and religious animosity among the nations that inhabited those territories. As we know, the first anti-Armenian pogroms of a genocidal nature appeared in the middle of the last decade of the 19th century. The same with Assyrians. While the massacres of Armenians started in Sassoon in April of 1894, the atrocities of Assyrians began a year later, in October of 1895 in Diyarbakir. This violence directed and perpetrated against unarmed people in the peacetime marked the beginning of the development of state genocidal program. It was organized by Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who exercised one-man rule, and important political decisions were made by him alone. Its implementation ended in mass killings of 300,000 Armenians and 55,000 Assyrians of the Ottoman Empire. The genocidal nature of Sultan Abdul Hamid's not only anti-Armenian but also anti-Assyrian policy is beyond any doubt. Several of the circumstances from which International Criminal Tribunal judges inferred genocide were present: mass killing, large-scale rape, destruction of villages and religious sites, and deportation of civilians. Assyrian villages and towns were sacked by organized mobs or Kurdish bands. The bloodshed and destruction gained a fearsome momentum. Tens of thousands were driven from their homes. About 100,000 Assyrians of 245 villages were forcibly converted to Islam. Their property was plundered. All possessions, such as gold, silver, money, were confiscated. Thousands of Assyrians, men, women, children, and old people were brutally assassinated. We Assyrian women and girls were forced into Turkish and Kurdish households. The slaughters were perpetrated as barbarously as possible, regardless of age or gender. On June 2nd of 1895, the New York Times reported, "We have the unanimous verdict of the native Christians of Turkey, Armenians and Assyrians, that the Sultan is personally responsible not only because he gave direct orders that men, women, and children should be tortured, outraged, and murdered, but because for years past he has persistently followed a course that would infallibly end in just such a condition of things as the present." The Hamidian massacres revealed most of all the breakdown of the traditional Ottoman paternalistic system, in which status was assigned and minorities were tolerated. The Austro-Hungarian ambassador to Constantinople defined it as a crusade of Muslims against the Christians. In October of 1895, during the Hamidian massacres, the Assyrian Church of Virgin Mary in Amida or Amid, Tigranagert in Diyarbakir, gave refuge not only to Assyrians but also the Armenians. Here, a revealing exchange occurred when several Assyrians suggested to their priest that the Armenian refugees be expelled from the building so as not to aggravate Turkish sentiment. The Assyrian priest replied, "The people who cross themselves will stay in church to the end. Should we be killed, we will be killed together." In the end, 119 villages in Diyarbakir were scorched and ruined. 6,000 Christian families, about 30 to 32,000 Armenians and Assyrians were killed. And this is only one example. In Armenian National Archives, there are dozens of these types of documents regarding the solidarity of the Assyrians and Armenians during these difficult times. And this is just an example from the source of the National Archive of Armenia, and you can see it's written about Assyrians and Armenians. It's a handwriting. Then on July 23, 1908, the Young Turks Party Union and Progress organized a revolt and seized the power. All the people of the empire, Muslims or Christians, vigorously welcomed the overthrow of the Red Sultan. They hoped it was the dawning of new age in the history of the Ottoman Empire. But as appeared shortly after, the Young Turks were ardent nationalists who continued the policy of oppressions and slaughters carried out prior to them by sultans. They were advocates of the idea of assimilation of all the peoples of the empire to create a pure Turkish nation, never stopping before killings in order to execute that idea. How could a political vanguard that advocates democracy, fraternity, and equal rights in 1908 make such a hostile decision in 1910 at the annual Young Turks Congress at Saloniki, Greece, where the secret discussion outside the formal sittings revolved around a plan for the coercive homogenization of Turkey, euphemistically called the complete Ottomanization of all Turkish subjects. British Ambassador Lover observed that to them, Ottoman evidently means Turks, and their present policy of Ottomanization is one of the pounding the non-Turkish element in a Turkish mortar. Thus, the radical wing of the Young Turks didn't limit its ambitions to governing a multinational Ottoman state. It espoused a completely ideology which envisioned the remarking of the Ottoman Empire into an exclusively Turkish nation. The Young Turks intended to transform the pluralistic Ottoman Empire into an ethnically, religiously homogeneous national state. Christians couldn't have an equal part in such a new society. The ambitions of the Young Turks, however, extended beyond this primary goal. According to Taner Akçam, the Committee of Union and Progress had formulated, prior to the First World War, a policy that they began to execute in the Aegean region against the Greeks, and during the war years expanded to include the Assyrians, Chaldeans, the Syrians, and especially the Armenians, a policy that eventually became a genocidal. Detailed reports were prepared outlining the elimination of the Christian population. Britain, France, and Russia initially defined Ottoman atrocities against minorities as crimes against Christianity, but later substituted humanity after considering the negative reaction that such a specific term could elicit from Muslims in their colonies. During one of the secret meetings, the Young Turks ideologist Dr. Nazım said, "Massacre is necessary. I want Turks and only Turks to live on this soil and to be in full of possession of it. The hell with all the non-Turkish elements, no matter what their nationality or religious is." According to German missionary and humanist Dr. Johannes Lepsius, the Young Turks party program stated, "Sooner or later, all the nations under the Turkish control will be turned into Turks. And it is clear that they will not convert voluntarily and we will have to use the force." The Young Turks wouldn't wait for circumstances to define their policy. They would seek the opportunity to protest with their plans. That occasion offered itself sooner than expected in 1914, when Europe plunged into World War I, and the Young Turk triumvirate, Minister of Interior Talat, Minister of War Enver, and Minister of Navy Cemal, who had been governing the Ottoman Empire since 1913, secretly and eagerly brought their country into the war. During a talk with Dr. Mortman, an employee of the German embassy, Talat Pasha said that exploiting the opportunity of martial law, the Turkish government would eventually get rid of its internal enemies, the Christians, without fear of foreign diplomatic intervention. Dr. Bihaeddin Shakir, executive committee member of the Committee of Union and Progress, said almost the same thing. "We are in war. There is no danger of European intervention. The world press cannot protest, and even if they do, it won't bring any results. In the future, the present problem will have become a matter of fact. The voice will fade and no one will dare to raise a voice of protest. We must take full advantage of these delicate circumstances, since they will not present themselves again." The Young Turks' overall aim was a demographic reorganization of the Ottoman Empire. All deportations were planned and supervised by the Directorate for the Settlement of Tribes and Immigrants that belonged to the Ottoman Ministry of the Interior. A relatively small number of government administrators were involved in the planning and coordinating of the murder and expulsion of the Armenians and Assyrians, although local government soldiers, tribes, carried out many of the killings. The deportation scheme issued from Istanbul. Thus, once Christian society was completely paralyzed, the government issued the deportation edict. On June 30, 1915, the American consul in Kharbet province, Leslie David, wrote to Ambassador Henry Morgenthau in Constantinople that it was publicly announced that all the Armenians and Assyrians have to leave. You see the picture from Harvard from June 30th, and I'm showing that picture like Armenians and Assyrians. Throughout the spring and summer of 1915, across the length and breadth of the Ottoman Empire, Armenians and Assyrians were ordered to prepare themselves for removal from their homes. Their destination was unknown. With only few days' notice, in most places, the entire villages and towns were deported. Thousands upon thousands were set upon the roads, forced to abandon homes and belongings. Now, the next important topic I'd like to discuss very quickly, it's the Ottoman documents on the Assyrian deportation and massacres. During my presentation, I'm just going to show you the following 5 documents from the Ottoman archives. And all the documents are telegrams sent from the Ministry of the Interior of the Government of Ittihad Veteraki, or Committee of Union and Progress, or Young Turks. The telegrams are sent to the governors in the province of Van, Mosul, Diyarbakir, Harber, Aleppo, and Bitlis. The documents show that all Assyrian denominations, be it Nestorian, Chaldean, or Syriac Orthodox or Catholic, have been affected by the turmoil of the deportations. Although the telegrams, they don't make any mention of massacres, but the last telegram, which is number 5, let me go there. Okay. Document number 5, it's the last telegram, which I believe acknowledges that many villages around Mardin, Midyat, Diyarbakir were already empty. No doubt that these villages were once populated by Assyrians and Armenians. The Young Turks government, having caused evacuation of the villages through physical elimination, and then sought to repopulate villages with Turks from the Balkans, inevitably altering the ethnic makeup of the region. During the First World War, on the territory of Ottoman Empire, the atrocities of our people were perpetrated with unspeakable brutality. All possible methods of killing were used: shooting, stabbing, stoning, crushing, throat cutting, throwing off of the roots, drowning, and decapitation. It is absolutely impossible to read the multiple trustworthy documents describing those atrocities and remain indifferent or apathetic. Turkish armed forces slaughtered Assyrians in the region of Turabrin beginning of June 1915, where 10,000 Assyrians were murdered. One document reads, "The skulls of the small children were smashed with rocks. The bodies of girls and women who resisted rape or conversion to Islam were chopped into pieces. Men were mostly beheaded or thrown into the nearby river. The clergy, monks, and nuns were skinned or burned alive." Rashid Bey, the governor of Diyarbakir, directed the earliest anti-Christian extermination projects in his region. The Assyrians of Mardin, Midyat, Urfa, and Jazira regions were especially victimized. The most brutal slaughters of many thousands of Assyrians were perpetrated. Through various compilations, there is written evidence of massacres and attacks against Assyrians in 178 small towns and villages in Diyarbakir province and its nearest neighboring regions only in 1915. The priest of the local Assyrians in the province of Diyarbakir, Reverend Joseph Naim, in his book reported that massacres in his regions had taken place since April 8, 1918. The culprits gathered men over 16 years of age, beat, tortured, killed them, and afterwards put turbans on their heads and photographed them in order to prove to the world that Christians were oppressing Muslims, not vice versa. Assyrians also suffered in the province of Van, where the governor Cevdet Bey had a butcher regiment of 8,000 Turkish soldiers that carried out unprecedented massacres. 60 Assyrian villages in Van had been subjected to atrocities. One striking example was the terrible slaughter in the Hakkari region in spring of 1915, where Turks murdered approximately 6,000 Assyrians. The village of Kochanis, which was the residence of the Assyrian Patriarch, was completely destroyed. Dr. Johannes Lepsius, German Protestant missionary, was an eyewitness how Turks hanged lots of innocent Assyrians at the gates of city of Van, in one of the central streets of the town. When some of them tried to protect themselves and fight back, they all were arrested and killed. I wish I could erase that horrible image from my memory of those terrible days and could keep silent about that horrific tragedy of the Assyrians. Dr. Johannes Lepsius wrote in his memories. I am going to refer again to source of the Armenian National Archives, the story of the survivors of the genocide from Van, who is an Armenian doctor, but during his story he speaks how Assyrians and Armenians together went to massacres, and some of them they were killed, big part they were killed, and some of them were survived, and he tried to keep everything alive that time. You can see his handwriting, and he speaks about the story, and it comes from, you can see, 1915. In June of 1915, the armies of Cevdet Bey, I have another one, yeah. It's Armenians and Assyrians in Van from December 1916, March 1917. Again, it says the Rutune Vanum, the situation in Van in December of 1916. So in June 1915, the armies of Cevdet Bey and General Halil Bey organized a general massacre in the province of Bitlis, which lasted throughout the month. 1,000 Armenians and Assyrians were mercilessly killed in their houses on the streets. In the National Archive, again, we have thousands of documents regarding this. So in 1916, while the crime was still in progress, a volume of valuable documents was prepared by Viscount James Bryce and Oxford historian Arnold Toynbee, and published by the British Parliament. In one of its chapters, this blue book described how Cevdet Bey entered the regions of Bohtan, Bitlis, and Sghert and massacred not only the Armenians but also the Assyrian population. The Assyrians endured massacres not only inside the Ottoman realm but on its periphery as well. The destruction of Assyrian villages accompanied German and Turkish military operations in Iran, which the two allies intended to use as a corridor to the oil regions of Baku and thereafter to invade Central Asia. Iran, being a neutral country during the World War I, thus became a battleground on which acts of mass violence were perpetrated against these undesirable elements. 70,000 Assyrians of Urmia region were among the most unfortunate elements. After all, the painful exodus from Urmia to Mesopotamia began and was accompanied by severe human losses. An English eyewitness noted, "The Assyrian Exodus is one of the most tragic pages of the military history. More than 70,000 Assyrians died on that way." In November of 1916, the New York Times published an article by Dr. William Rockwell entitled "The Total Number of Armenian and Assyrian Dead," in which the author noted, "The Armenians are not the only unfortunates. The Assyrians also have been decimated. Great numbers have perished, but no one knows how many. This is in November of 1916. Another American periodical, the Atlantic Monthly, wrote, within 6 months, young Turks succeeded in doing what the old Turks were unable to accomplish in 6 centuries. Thousands of Nestorians and Assyrians vanished from the face of the earth. Thus, as we could see, the Assyrian genocide, along with the Armenian genocide, was by no means accidental or unexpected. It logically derived from the brutal and nationalistic policy pursued by the Turkish sultans and later the young Turks against the non-Turkish nations during the preceding decades. It was not a policy of individuals, but an official state policy, which included persecution and carnage. The massacres and slaughters of my both people, which took place at the end of the 19th century and during World War I in the Ottoman Empire, were clearly a form of genocide, the contemporary term for any attempt to destroy a national, ethnic, or religious group in whole or in a part. The testimonies of the U.S. Ambassador Morgenthau and consuls are of a great importance in order to substantiate the genocide of the Christian populations in the Ottoman state, whereas the narrations of the survivors and the whipping of geographical and historic presence of Christian population from their country are the proof that the crime of genocide has been committed. There has been a systematic procedure of slaughter which started by the disarmed and the massive killing of the Assyrians and Armenians who had been enlisted in the Turkish army, extermination of leaders, arrest of slaughters of the physically able male. In some regions, the civilians were slaughtered immediately and bluntly. In others, the transfer of civilians looks like a time banishment, and there were some possibilities of rescuing only if somebody embraced the Islam. However, the general form of slaughtering and banishment, as well as the systematic elimination from the place they lived, are the evidence of existence of intention for the genocide. According to Hannibal Travis, professor of law at Florida International University, as in other recognized genocides, the Ottoman and their local allies, the Kurds and Persians, demonstrated a pattern of deliberate and systematic targeting of Christians, as such including Assyrians, for murder, maiming, enslavement, rape, dispossession, impoverishment, and cultural ethnic destruction. Nevertheless, governments and historians have not been as willing to recognize the Assyrian experience during and after World War I as a form of genocide, or even to acknowledge the existence and criminality of the Ottoman atrocities against the Assyrians. According to Professor Gant, the Assyrian, Chaldean, and Syriac victims were easy to single out because they belonged to a non-Muslim group and spoke non-Turkic language. They were fast targeted for violent ethnic cleansing as religious and ethnic groups, but not a racial group. Thus, the reason for their extermination should be sought against the background of their religious and ethnic deviation from the political standards held by the ideologies in power. According to Professor Akçam, the document from the Ottoman government archives in Istanbul, which were once classified as top secret, clearly demonstrate that Ottoman demographic policy from 1913 to 1918 was genocidal. Indeed, the phrase crime against humanity was coined as a legal term and first used on May 24, 1915 in response to the genocide against Armenians and other Christian civilians. And in conclusion, where do we stand after more than a century since the state-orchestrated massacres and deportations happened to our people. Nowadays, when modern Turkish historiography and the ruling political cycles categorically deny the genocide of the Armenians, it similarly cannot accept the genocide of the Assyrians or Greeks. The Assyrian genocide is still an open wound for its people, an unfinished chapter in world history, for the guilty part has yet to receive the punishment it deserves. The lessons of history show that different people pay dearly when crimes against humanity are forgotten. The size of the people has no significance when the theory of race worship is raised to the level of an official state policy. As a consequence of actions taken by the Ottoman Turks with the intention of racial and religious purification, Assyrians today have been forced to live as a stateless people in the diaspora. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry it was a little longer.